Hi, hello, a very good morning to everyone. I'm Dr. Harika Kishore. On behalf of Vista's Learning, I'm here as your biology educator and I would like to welcome you all for the present session. Learning, it's an online education platform which works with an ideology of providing quality education for all. Visit our website www.v-learning.in where you are going to get an access for all the live classes, recorded sessions, study materials, concept videos. Moreover, you are going to get this lecture notes in the form of PDFs. And also get your acquaintance with all the channels available. Make sure to subscribe to the channel Vista's Learning Class 11 and 12. If you find this session interesting and informative, click on the like as well as share this session with your friends. And don't forget to click on the bell icon such that you are going to get all the upcoming video notifications. Saying that, let's start today's session. We are in the series of the sessions where we have been discussing about the chapter ecosystem that comes under the unit ecology. In the previous session, we have been discussed about ecological pyramids and also we discussed about the energy flow. Now, in this session, let's focus on another important topic that is called as ecological succession. So, we have been discussing about the components, both structural components and functional components. The structural components of the ecosystem consists of biotic factors as well as abiotic factors. And they perform as a unit, they perform so many functions, which comes starting from productivity, we discussed decomposition, we also discussed here and discussed decomposition as well as we had a discussion about the food chains and food webs as well. And in that, the further functions forward in the form of nutrient cycling as well as energy flow. We discussed about the energy flow and we will discussing about this nutrient cycling in the coming up session. So in this session, let's first understand about how the succession takes place, and that is what we are calling it as an ecological succession. We already know environment. Ecology is nothing but study of the interactions of the biotic factors among themselves as well as the biotic factor, how they are interacting with the abiotic factors. We already know that abiotic factors are nothing but physical factors which includes light, temperature, soil, water, etc. And the biotic factors are living components of the ecosystem like plant system, animal system, mankind, humans. So here we know that biotic factors, environment keeps on changing. It will never remain as a constant. And depending upon reacting to these changes, what is happening towards environment, there is the changes and that changes that is nothing but succession. Let's understand here. An important characteristic of all the communities is that their composition. Composition is the number of the species of the organism as well as diversity of the species of the organism. Composition of the ecosystem as well as structure. And here the point is composition as well as structure of the ecosystem never remains constant because they have been regulated. They have been under the control of the environment and we know that the environment never remains constant. Temperature, for example, to understand that, we are telling that environment never remains constant. The light or temperature, water availability, these are all the abiotic factors which keeps on changing from time to time. And according to these changes, there is a changes that is coming in the composition as well as structure of the ecosystem. So here, composition as well as structure constantly changes, and this changing constantly, that means persistently it keeps on changing in response to the changing environmental conditions. Simple. As the environment never remains constant, we can find the changing environmental conditions. And these changing environmental conditions will regulate the changes and therefore composition as well as structure keeps on changing. They will never remain constant. And in this changes, how this changes happens, we know that it is regulated by the environmental changes. That is one thing. And these changes is orderly, sequentially sequential, and parallel. Parallel to the changes in the physical environment. Physical environment we already know, that is nothing but abiotic factors. So, as the abiotic factors, physical factors never remain constantly in the environment. Therefore, in accordance, that means as this environment controlling, regulating the biotic factors, definitely composition as well as structure of the ecosystem also keeps on changing with respect to the changes that is happening in the environmental conditions. That is so simple. And here the important point is that changes are gradual, fairly predictable, that is going to be happen in the composition of the species in a particular unit area, and that is nothing but our succession. Now, here these changes, up to now we understand that environment never remained constant. It keeps on showing some changes, and in relation, reacting to those changes, the changes will happen in the composition as well as structure. And what type of changes? These changes are very steady, fairly, parallel, sequential, and orderly done. Now, these changes leads to finally to the community, which is nearly equilibrium. It tried to become stable, nearly reaches to the equilibrium. Now, with the environment, and that is called as final community, that is climax community. The final community is stable, nearly stable, that is what we are calling it as a near equilibrium. Now, this gradual, fairly predictable changes in the composition of the species, changes in the species composition of a given area. This is important. Of a given area, we are taking given area into consideration, and that is called as your ecological succession. This ecological succession in plants that were given to you. Now, so here during succession, nothing but changes to reach to the fairly stable, nearly equilibrium community, and that is called as climax community. Some species colonizes an area. As it is colonizing, it increases in number, right? And their population become more numerous. That's an increase in number. Increase in number. While some species are increasing in number, the other species shows decrease in number. Whereas population of the other species decline. Decline is nothing but decrease, and even it completely disappears. That means it goes like completely reducing number, and finally it leads to disappear of that particular species. And here the entire sequence of the communities that successively changes in a given area are called as series, plural series, and the stages that are coming in this series are called as seral stages. Now, so here an individual changes, nothing but transitional community. Individual transitional communities are termed as, just now we said that the complete transition we consider as a series, and the stages, individual transition that is happening in each community to reach to its near equilibrium stage, to reach to its final stage, that means climax community. Each stage we call it as a seral stage or seral community. Now, in a successive seral stages, there is a change in the diversity of the species of an organism. Just now we said that this is all about the changes that is happening in the composition and structure, right? So here the diversity of the species of the organism and increase in the number of the species of the organism and organisms, as well as their increase in the total biomass. One is here composition, That means diversity. One is number of an organism and other one is total biomass. Total biomass. So here, in the successive serial stages, there is a changes in the diversity. One is diversity, that is called as composition. Diversity of the species of an organism, increase in the number of the species of the organisms, as well as increase in the total biomass. That is composition, nothing but your diversity. Diversity of the species of the organism, number of the species of the organism, as well as total biomass of the organisms keeps on changing, and that steady changes, fairly changes, parallel, orderly, sequential changes, what we call it as a xerarch, and stages we consider them as a seral stages or seral communities. Now, so here the present day communities, whatever we find the plant communities or animal communities in the world, have come to be because of succession that has been occurring over millions of years. Over millions of years, they have been changing in response to the changes that is happening in the environment. They have been changing the, showing the changes in terms of number of the species, that means number of the plant species, number of the animal species, as well as they has been showing the changes in their composition, diversity and total biomass. All these changes are happening not during a short period. It takes place millions of years together since the life started on Earth. And that is what it tries to reach to the fairly near equilibrium and the climate community, that is the forest community in the case of plant succession. Now, actually succession and evolution. Succession as well as evolution would have been parallel process at any given time. If you take at any given time, at any point of given time, in the case of no matter it is plant ecosystem or the animal ecosystem, both will show the changes in response to the changes that is happening in the environment. And that changes are happening in such a way that it is going to show its succession as well as it is going to show its evolution parallelly. That is what parallel process at any given time of point. Now, so here succession is a process. It's a process that starts in an area where no living organisms are there. No life is there. Like consider bare areas, like bare lands, where there is no existence of the life at all. Then that is the place, that is the area where we can see the starting of this succession. There could be an area where no living organisms never existed. They may be existed, now it is not there. One condition. Coming to another condition where there is a living conditions that never existed there. This is never existed condition. Here they existed, but at a given time, due to deforestation or due to some accidents, due to some burning, burnt that is happened in the forest area. Now at that present time, the living organisms are not there. In the first condition, life was there previously, but at that given point of time, the existent life is not possible because it is happened due to some accidents. Maybe like natural reasons, natural calamities like floods, earthquake, or due to man-made mistakes like burn or deforestation that is happening. In the second condition, here is the condition where the area never have seen any existence of life. So here, that never existence, life never existence, example, bare rocks, or an area that somehow lost all the living organisms that existed there. There is a time where the living organisms are present, but now what happens? It lost the existing living organisms. So here the point is, The condition where we can see there is no existence of the life, it has to start with the primary succession. The condition where we can see the land is previously occupied by the living organisms. Now, for some reasons, that area lost the existence of the living organism. Then it will show the succession of secondary type. In the first case, we can see primary succession. In the second case, we see secondary succession. Let's understand. So here, the former condition where area that has no existence, never living organisms existed. In that areas, it will show primary succession. While the later one means once in the time there was an existence of the life, but at present moment the area lost the existing living organisms. Therefore, the living organisms are not present, but previously they were present. So that condition where area will show secondary succession due to some reason, some man-made or natural reasons like floods, earthquakes, or due to some cutting of the forest or burnt of the forest, that what we call it as the deforestation. Because of these reasons, the living organisms are not present in that particular area. Now that area will show the secondary type of succession. Examples of the area where primary succession takes place. Primary succession means previously there never existed in living organisms. So primary successions always happens in a newly cooled lava regions, bare rocks, newly formed ponds as well as reservoirs, newly created ponds and reservoirs. These are all the examples of the area which shows primary succession. So this point, if it is clear, then the rest is very, very simple to understand. Here the thing is, succession is hence a process that starts in an area where no living organisms are there. And this no living organisms can be of two types. One is completely there is no existence of the living organism, where the primary succession happens. The second condition, previously it is occupied by the living organism, but due to some reason, now at this point, at this moment, we don't find any living organisms. Therefore, such areas will show secondary succession. There could be areas where no living organisms never existed. This is the area which shows primary succession. Right. Now, say bare rocks, that is never existed, life never existed. That is where we see the primary succession. In the areas that somehow lost all the living organisms, that means the living organisms existed previously, but now at this moment of time there is no existence, and this lost is due to some reasons. It may be natural reasons or man-made reasons that existed there. Now, so this is how we have come across to understand the two types of the successions, primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession happens in the area where the life never existed, and whereas the secondary succession happens in the area where it lost the living organisms due to some reasons. Now, so here, the establishment of new biotic communities is generally slow, because that means we are all talking about the primary succession. What we are telling, primary succession is shown by an area, and that area where we never have the possibilities of existence of living organisms. Therefore, in order to make that area convenient for the growth of the living organisms, it has to show some vegetation, and that vegetation has to come from the fertile soil. These lands, all we have taken, that is bare rocks, newly cooled lava, and newly created ponds as well as reservoirs. All these things has to show establishment of new biotic. Biotic means living factors. Plant systems, animal system. Community is generally slow. The process is slow because it has to start from a point 1. When coming to the example of the secondary succession, in the secondary succession, the life is already there. Living organisms are existed previously. Therefore, the sediments or some matter will be there. Some organic matter will be there. Therefore, the establishment of the biotic community will be little faster when compared to the primary succession. But here, before a biotic community of diverse organisms can become established, there must be soil. We need soil. What do you mean by biotic factors? Biotic factors is all living factors. Plant system, animal system. Plant will grow. Plant will germinate. Seed will germinate. Where? Soil. And that soil should be fertile. If there is a presence of the fertile soil which favors the growth of the germination of the seed, then that seed converts into small plants. That plants will grow from starting like phytoplanktons to herbs, shrubs, small trees, then large trees, finally leads to fairly stable, nearly equilibrium climax community, and that is called as forest community in the case of plant succession. As the plants are growing, taking the food from these plants producers, definitely consumers will also grow. That means animal system can also be supported. But for that, before all this happens, we need the presence of the soil. And that is depending mostly on the climate. It takes natural processes. Formation of the soil is a natural process and it takes a very, very long time, nearly several hundreds to several thousand years to produce fertile soils on bare rocks. It's not that simple for the formation of the soil. That is a process of formation of the soil, what we call it as a soil withering. It takes several thousands to several hundreds to several thousand years for the formation of the soil, for the withering to happen on this bare rocks. Once the fertile soil is available, then slowly there is a increase in this different stages, what we call it as the several stages, to finally leads to the climax stage. So that is what the primary succession always takes time. Secondary succession begins an area where natural biotic communities has been destroyed. Destroyed means they have been existed previously, such as what we call it as an abandoned farmlands. Farmlands previously there were farmlands, but they have been abandoned. Therefore, as the proper care is not taken care of this farmlands, they become now. There is no existence of the living organisms, but previously it is having the existence of living organisms. Now, as we already said, burned or cut forest, deforestation, lands that has been flooded. That means due to floods, there is that particular area have lost the existence of the living organisms. Now, all these areas are the examples for showing secondary succession. In such type of areas, there is an existence of soil. Since some soil or sediment is present, succession is faster. This is the point you have to remember. This is very, very important. Always secondary succession is faster than primary succession. Reason for that is primary succession starts on the area where there is no existence of living organisms at all. Therefore, the living organisms to have their origin, for the germination of the seed, we need soil. For that, it has to show withering process. Formation of the soil from rocks, bare rocks, takes very, very long time. But since this areas which is showing the secondary succession are having some remains of the soil as well as some sediments of the soil, it is very comparatively quicker. It is faster when compared to the primary succession. Point to be noted here is secondary succession is faster than primary succession. Now, here. So, description of ecological succession usually focus on changes in the vegetation. Just now we said that vegetation will support the increase of animal system, right? So that is the biotic components. And this what we call it, say, change in the composition, species diversity, increase in number of the species of the organisms, increase in the total biomass of the species, all that is under the control, or it is regulated by the changes that is happening in the vegetation. As the soil is newly formed, it is going to support a very limited vegetation. For example, like phytoplanktons, if you consider a newly formed ponds where the starting stages are phytoplanktons, slowly it starts showing some submerged vegetation, and after that submerged rooted with the floating leaves, and after that floating plants. This is how it can show different stages, and slowly herbs, slowly scrubs, that what we call it as a scrub stage, that is nothing but shrubs, and finally small plants and large plants, which is finally going to lead to the climax forest community. So here, this is all that what we call it as in phytoplanktons, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms. This is the increase in the range, right? And that is nothing but change in vegetation. However, these vegetational changes in turn affects food as well as shelter for various types of animals. That is what we said. Once the vegetation is ready, it is going to influence by giving a proper food or the shelter animals are going to depend on the plants that we already know for their food. And as there is a changes in the vegetation, these changes in the vegetation obviously going to show some of the changes that is happening towards the growth of the succession that has been shown by the animals. Now, thus, a succession proceeds, the number and type of animals and decomposers also changes. So, if there is a change in the vegetation, there is a change in the number of the animals, and there is a change in the availability of number of the decomposers. So, that changes, one change is going to regulate other change. It's a series. That is what we are calling it as an orderly, sequential, parallel succession. Now, at any time during primary or secondary succession, for example, what we are telling, several stages, right? We have so many several stages. For example, consider this is a several stage number 1. Okay. It leads to number 2. It leads to number 3. It leads to number 4, and finally final stage, right? Say for example, phytoplanktons, submerged plants, like submerged rooted plant, then after floating leaves, rooted plant to the floating leaves, then after herbs, shrubs, and finally trees. That is what happens. So here, this is a series, order, parallelly happening. So here, several stages, 1, which after that it reaches to 2, then 2 become 3, 3 become 4, and it finally reaches the final stable near equilibrium community. At any time, whether it is primary succession or secondary succession, natural or human induced disturbances in the form of fire, deforestation, etc., can convert a particular serial stage of succession to an earlier stage. For this to understand, let's, for example, there is a particular plant succession which has reached stage 1. After that, it has reached stage 2. And now, it is going to reach to the stage 3. But here in this particular point, what happened? There is some disturbances that has been caused by some human-induced disturbances happened. It may be fire, it may be deforestation, something happens. Then what happened? We are telling that plant succession has reached one stage to the second stage to third stage. While it is going to reach to the third stage, some disturbances has happened in between. So what happened? Instead of going to the previous, that means the forwarding stage, it will revert back. Then again, this is completed. It has reached the stage 2. Again, it has to try to reach to the third stage. The point here is, if there is any disturbances between one stage to another stage, the succession convert from a particular serial stage of a succession to an earlier stages. It come back to an earlier stage. Again, it has to start from 2 to 3. If there is no succession, it is going to reach to the third stage, then it is going to reach to the fourth stage, and finally climax community. Now, so here also such disturbances create a new conditions that encourages some species and discourages or eliminate other species. This disturbances is happening during the stages where the succession is going to reach from one serial stage to another serial stage. Definitely it is going to convert back to the earlier stage. From there again it has to forward to the preceding stage. While this is happening, this disturbances also creates some organisms will be encouraged and some other organisms will be discouraged and eliminated. That is what we are telling. Changes happens in composition. This is the first sentence we already given. Succession is all about the changes in the composition and the structure. Now, so based on the nature of the habitat is your area which supports succession. Whether it is water means, see, if the water availability is plenty, very wet areas, or it is on very dry areas, succession of plants is called as hydrarch, xerarch. Hydrarch is more wet. Xerarch is more dry. This is very wet areas and this is very, very dry areas. So the plant succession which is happening in the areas with a plenty of availability of the water, wetlands, what we call it as a hydrarch succession. Whereas the plant succession which is happening in the areas that are very dry in nature, that succession we call it as a xerarch succession. Whereas we have another condition that is called as mesarch, where medium water availability is there. Whether the plant succession is happening from the hydrarch or it is happening from the xerarch, it tries to meet in the between, that is the medium availability of the water, that is mesarch condition. Hydrarch succession takes place in very wet areas where the water availability is very, very more. In wet and the successional series progress from hydric to mesarch condition. Just now I mentioned whether the succession is happening from the two wet habitats, two wet areas, what we call it as a hydrarch succession, or it is happening from the xerarch condition. That means where the areas will show very dry in nature. That means dryness is more there. That means water availability is very, very less there. It starts to meet at one common point, and that is called as mesarch condition. That is the availability of medium water. It is not like too much of dryness or too much of water availability. Now, as against this, the xerarch succession takes place in the dry areas and the series progress from the xeric to mesarch condition. So here, whether it is happening from the hydric or whether it is happening in the xeric, it meets at, that means it progresses, the series progress towards meeting mesarch conditions. That means medium water availability. So here, hydric, xeric. So here, hydric is two wet areas, xeric is to dry, very dry areas. The succession happens whether it starts in the hydrarch or xerarch. This series progresses in such a way that it has to reach to the mesic conditions. So hydrarch series progress to reach to the mesic conditions. Same way, xeric conditions series progress towards a mesic condition to meet the mesic condition. What do you mean by mesic? Medium water. That means slowly water ecosystem is going to convert into terrestrial ecosystem, land ecosystem. That means the land will support formation of the trees. As we already said, that changes in the vegetation starts from the phytoplanktons, where it slowly progresses towards the bryophytes, then pteridophytes, then gymnosperms, then well-developed angiosperms. So here, hence, both hydrarch, very wet areas, xerarch, very dry, both hydrarch as well as xerarch succession leads to medium water condition, that is mesic. That is what we mentioned. Mesic, neither too dry xeric condition nor too wet hydric conditions. So both hydric and xeric shows the succession in such a way that the series progress towards the medium water available conditions, and that is called as mesic condition. Simple. Now, here, the species that invades a bare area, that means primary succession. The first species that is going to invade this bare areas are nothing but pioneer species. Pioneer species. In primary succession on rocks, this pioneer species are nothing but lichens that can secrete acids. Are usually lichens which are able to secrete acids, and these secreted acids have the ability to dissolve the rocks. While these rocks are dissolving, it is going to helpful for the process of the formation of soil, what we call as a soil weathering. Helps in weathering and soil formation. As we already said that the primary succession to occur, we need the presence of the soil, and that soil should be fertile. This soil has to form from the bare rocks itself, and that bare rocks has been first occupied by the pioneer species, that is what we call it as a primary species. Initial species means where the primary succession is happening, and that pioneer species here in the bare lands are lichens, and this lichens has the ability to secrete the acids, and that acids are going to dissolve the rocks, which are going to helpful for the formation of the soil. That is what we call it as a soil withering process. Now, yeah, we have soil now. Then this later paves a path, pave way to some very small plants, nothing but bryophytes, which are able to take hold in a less amount of soil. Even the less availability of the soil is there, these bryophytes can grow. Once the bryophytes started grow, it's surely form a path for the formation of a next level of plants. They are with time succeeded by the higher plants, and after several more stages, ultimately a stable, nearly equilibrium climax, that is a forest community, is formed, and this is your climax community. Forest community. This is how a very small plant, that is bryophytes, shows so many several stages to finally leads to the climax stage, and that is called as forest community. Now, here, the climax community remains stable, that is what we call it as a near equilibrium, as long as there is no changes that is happening in the environment. See, in the first point itself, we explained that the environment never remains constant. The environment keep on showing some of the changes until where this environment is not showing any changes. The climax what have been reached by the primary succession or secondary succession will be stable until the time where the environment remain unchanged. when the time where the environment is showing changes, that will definitely shows its influence, regulate, and the changes happens in the succession too. Now, with time, the xerophytic means dry. That is nothing but xeric conditions, gets converted into mesophyte. That is what we said, no? Xeric to mesic. Same way, in primary succession, in water, the pioneers are small phytoplanktons, which are replaced with time by first rooted submerged plants, then it succeeds towards rooted floating angiosperms, followed by the free floating plants. Then reed swaps, marsh meadows, scrub, and finally trees. Nothing but forest, that is your climax community. That means here hydrarch to mesic. The climax again would be your forest. So with time, the water bodies are also converting into terrestrial forms, that is forms on land. In secondary succession, this is all about primary succession. In secondary succession, the species that invades depends on the condition of the soil, water availability, environment, as also it depends upon the seeds or other propagules that are present, because in the primary succession the soil has to form newly by the breakdown of the rocks by the help of the lichens, which produces acids that is going to dissolve the rocks and leads to the formation of the soil. Once the soil is available, it becomes fertile and supports the vegetation. Changes in the vegetation finally leads to the forest climax community. But here the succession, the species which invades, that is a pioneer species, depends upon conditions like soil, water availability, environment, and also it depends upon the availability of the what type of soil, what type of seeds, as well as propagules. Depending upon it, the invaders is decided in the secondary succession, whereas in the primary it starts with a very small vegetation, that is nothing but your phytoplanktons. This is a image that has been taken from your NCERT textbook, which shows the different stages, nothing but chiral stages. Like we already know, it is phytoplanktons initial stage, then the phytoplankton slowly submerged, and these are called as submerged plant stage, then reed swap stage. This is what it first reaches to submerged free floating. Here we can see it is first submerged here. These are all submerged. Think that this is a water level. Then here what happened? Free floating. We can see some of the plants that are free floating here. And from there, red swap stage. From there, marsh meadow stage. From there, scrub stage, right? From here to here, then again here and here. And this scrub stage finally leads to your more stable climax forest community. This is the representation of primary succession. So here some soil is already there in the secondary succession. So therefore, the rate of the succession is much faster and hence the climax also reached more quickly in the case of secondary succession. What is important to understand here is, one is that succession, particularly primary succession, is very slow process. Remember this. And the reason we already know, because the soil has to form first, then only it supports the vegetation, and that changes in the vegetation finally leads to the forest climax community. Taking maybe it is going to take thousands of years for the climax to be reached. Therefore, the primary succession is always very, very slow. And another point to know, another important fact to understand is that all succession, whether taking place in water or on land, proceeds to a similar climax community, and that is called as mesic. That we already said that whether it is xeric, it has to proceed towards mesic. Whether it is hydrarch, also it has to proceed towards mesic only. And this is your final climax community. So the first important point to be remembered is that always the primary succession is very slow when compared to the secondary succession. And the second point is whether the succession is happening from the hydrarch conditions or whether the succession is happening from the xeric condition, it has to progress towards mesic conditions. That's it. Yeah, that is it. So in the present session, we discussed about the ecological succession and also succession that is happening in the plants. Coming up session, let's proceed with another important topic that is coming under your ecosystem. Until then, keep learning with V-Learning. Thank you.